Hello and welcome to SquishiVision. I have just finished catching up on my Star Trek. It's one of the things I use my holiday for, and I've just watched the final episode of Alright, Alexa, mute. I've just finished watching the final episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and I'm gonna attempt to. Oh, my Alexa heard me say that. There's no telling me about the show. I'm now gonna attempt to. I'm now going to attempt to kind of give my thoughts on the series. I don't usually reflect on an entire series. I usually always have episodes, so this will be interesting to see how much I kind of recall of what my impressions were after the fact. But I think this, as a, if we classify Star Trek into eras as a new Trek, this series kind of balances the whole. It's kind of a middle ground between Picard and Discovery, which were much more arc-based, much more arc-driven, big kind of serialized epic scales. While this kind of brought us more to the episodic aspect of other Star Treks, where kind of each episode is its own self-contained thing, but also kind of not, because several things happen in the show which rely on, you know, you having watched previous episode, and in fact each episode starts with a last time on, so you know there are these like character driven things which happen throughout the show, and if you haven't watched previous episodes you kind of thrown into it in a sense. It's not completely episodic, but it's not completely episodic, but it's not as arc driven as the other Star Treks. I mean, Picard is like one mini series you have to watch every episode. Earlier Discoveries, I think, well, Discovery actually is kind of also episodic, but it's episodic in the sense, in the same way. It's kind of with a scale. I think the scale goes Picard, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and then last season of the Deep Space Nine / the middle season of Enterprise, and then every other Star Trek show which is completely episodic to the point of you can watch an episode and then you can do what I've done and basically just watch it as it was syndicated on air without any kind of need that you watch a previous episode. But also a lot of, I mean, for starters, I delayed the stream an hour because I realized actually for me to fully appreciate a lot of the Strikes in this episode, I need to have been familiar with A Balance of Terror, which was an original series episode that this is basically a remake of in a sense, and I have watched that episode, or at least I've watched a significant portion of the episode. I don't know if I watched it ever from start to end, but I have done now, so I kind of paused the episode like a third of the way through, went back, well, like a quarter of the way through, went back, watched The Balance of Terror, and then came back and watched this, and there were a lot of like, I mean, that's quality. I've literally just finished watching Quality of Mercy, so that's the episode that's freshest in my mind, and so possibly is the one I'm going to be talking about the most, but I'll try and keep that to the end and go back to the rest of the series. So there's a degree of like suspension I've got to do mentally, because this is still a Star Trek that's set in an established period of time, and you're gonna be like, well, why? To its credit, it actually does a better job. I like Discovery. I'm a Discovery fan. I do feel a bit kind of turned off by the fact that Discovery, you know, the first two seasons of Discovery featured a lot of this kind of futuristic tech, which wasn't very we didn't really marry very well to like what we knew of the original series and the tech that was available there, and you know, people who were like fully defensive of it were like, well, you know, the people are like, you know, it's just TV, you just need like pretend that what was an original series is actually what we're seeing now. It's just that's how it's translated onto TV. I'm on the mindset of what's on TV is what's actually happening, and for me it kind of doesn't marry out. And even when we see the Enterprise in the second season of Discovery, and it looks a bit different, and that carries on into this series because obviously we're back on the Enterprise again. But to this show's credit, like there's very little of any holograms, there's very little if any kind of like non-tactile buttons. They're clicking things, they're pressing switches, but they make it look good for the modern TV. Like none of it looks like you're on a 1960s set. You look like you can feel like you're on a modern set. And I kind of wish that this is what I kind of wish Discovery did. And yeah, I will criticize Discovery. I like Discovery, and I'm a big defender of Discovery against all the massive critics of Discovery. But I will criticize its kind of set design being too futuristic, and when it could have done what this series didn't. Star Trek has done before. Like there were episodes of Enterprise that were set on a Constitution class ship when they went to the Mirror Universe, and they also jumped back in. They took a ship that was from their future, but the alternate universe future, and it was basically a replica of the Enterprise. It was no Constitution class. The Defiant, USS Defiant, and they basically made that set look like contemporary. And did that in this show as well. I kind of wish we did that in Discovery. That being said, there are kind of things which look a bit different, like a lot of like in the original series, a lot of the screens are kind of like text based or like very basic radar or very basic graphics, and here we've got like more complicated graphics, but not like too much. So it's a nice kind of balance. So that was pretty. So visuals, that was fine, and like the external ship visuals, that was alright. That was like nice and contemporary, but still consistent with previous styles. They even got the whole like Enterprise red kind of worry thing on the front of its nacelles. They were all kind of like the same. Uniforms are a bit weird because they're. I mean, if you look at the kind of versions of my background, they look like what Spock's wearing, what Union Singh is wearing, and what Mumba is wearing, and what Pike is wearing. They all are kind of similar to what they were in the original series on my background, but that's my background's got some filters on to make it look a bit blurred. There's more detail which we don't see in the show, and I'm like, are we meant to assume that detail wasn't there, or it just didn't come across, kind of thing. We also have these other kind of styles which we don't ever see again, but I guess that's. I mean, Starfleet in universe has a really inconsistent uniform kind of deal about it, where it rapidly changes, and then sometimes it has like the same uniform for like years and years and years and years. So I guess we can kind of excuse over that. Like these white uniforms. By the time we get to original series, this is set during the same time, like it overlap. It's really weird because like the original series is kind of like the Cage, which is actually set before Discovery and before Strange New Worlds, and that's where they're mostly all wearing very kind of pale yellow turtleneck jumpers. And then we jump to the pilot episode of the real series, which is set after both of season 1, 2 Discovery and this season of Strange New Worlds, and they're still wearing that. But then they go to the uniform that we know as classic Star Trek uniforms, which is more in line with this. So they must have flip-flopped. Like they must have flip-flopped at some point, which is a bit odd, but I don't know. It's strange that kind of occurs. But I guess you could make up a reason for it. I'm confused by the rank. This is kind of a detail I am very fascinated with, and this fictional. I love fictional rank systems, and I'm very confused by the rank systems because they have used the braids in this era of Starfleet. And if you look at Memory Alpha, it will claim that there is a single band for a lieutenant, 2 bands for a lieutenant commander, and then 2.5 bands for a captain. But you can probably see it in the picture actually behind me. Spock is clearly wearing 2 bands, but he's the lieutenant at this stage. Una is wearing 2 bands, but she's a lieutenant commander. or commander, and only Pike's kind of rank is the same thing. So yeah, that's just the kind of visual disparity. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty kind of consistent in the whole budget. Oh, and then for some reason phasers are shooting bolts, not beams, but whatever. I guess we can know that too. Other than that, we have fairly kind of episodic elements. So I'm just gonna try and know myself out of thought. So the first episode of Strange New Worlds is also called Strange New Worlds, which is a bit kind of annoying. And yeah, I mean, it's a fairly so in Strange New Worlds, essentially we're really grounding ourselves with the characters, and Captain Pike has taken a leave of absence, and in that because of his whole see the future thing. So there's a couple of arc plots, and there's really two main ones, which kind of there's three main arc plots, I guess. There's there's four actually, and I'm probably gonna pick up some more. Five. So the first one is Pike facing I guess nearly okay. Well, every character has something. I guess kind of. Well, so Pike's whole thing is he's traumatized by his foresight of his own death, which I guess it's fair enough because you would be. And but the thing is, it's how his arcs, but they're not what drives the plot. Each particular episode driving the plot. Just that if something reminds him of like what has occurred, then they will, reference it. So Pike's like, oh well, I know my future, and I can accept my future is going to be so and so, and I'm gonna, be severely injured, but I'm gonna save all these lives, and I've accepted that that's my fate. It's the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few kind of whole deal. And it only comes up a few points. I really comes up when something reminds him about that's his future, and he has a kind of a PTSD moment. And someone brings it up with him. Spock's like, you're kind of lucky to know your future. Lan is like, knowing that you're gonna die keeps you more obligated to kind of be proactive than just kind of be complacent. Whereas Chin Riley is like, actually, you can make your own destiny. You're not everything's pre-established. And that's the kind of the three conflicts he has. But he doesn't really actively deal with it. None of these kind of things happen. They kind of just bring it up with what's relevant. Chin Riley's whole thing only comes up twice. One in the episode when it's relevant, and then at the end of the series is actually Illyrian, not human, a species that had self-genetically engineered a whole bunch of their kind of situation, and then they kind of came to regret it because it meant they couldn't join the Federation. So Una is hidden that that's a species, so that she won't be kind of prejudiced against because of what her race is like. And that comes up in the episode when they go to Illyria, because most of the planet's now being kind of destroyed. And then it comes up at the end when this is discovered and she gets arrested, and that's a kind of our cliffhanger hook. No, Chappelle's probably actually the most stable I've ever run in this show. She has the least kind of things to deal with. Her and Ortega's are the most original stables. I don't think really. I think Nurse Chappelle's only real thing is actually in direct relation to Spock's thing, which is kind of like, not that great, but she's actually a really good character, and Jess Bush plays her very well, really charming. Then we have Lan Union Singh, who's, you think the whole deal would actually be that she is one of the descendants of Khan Union Singh, and you think that'd be a bigger thing, a more relevant plot thing. But actually, that's barely brought up. It's brought up once or twice. But really, her big thing is that she's the survivor of the Gorn who captured her ship when she was younger. and killed everyone she knew. It was violent, and so she had that background. She's very like, she's almost in a sense a very Yasha character, and her backstory is very similar. They both came from traumatized backgrounds and came to Starfleet and went into security. And again, it's not like a journey exactly, but like she, you know, they deal with the Gorn twice, and obviously she also brings it up a whole bunch of other times. And she's an interesting character. I think Christina Chong plays the character very well as someone who is clearly exhibiting the emotional growth of someone who went through a severe trauma, but you know, it's like kind of the nuanced thing. Like a lot of people who have trauma aren't just defined by the trauma. They're not all, you know, they act in ways which are slightly like socially abnormal, but not like completely socially abnormal, and it's because they're always in like a defense mechanism. And she plays it very well. She plays that kind of someone who's gone through that history and it's come out the other side, but obviously you've not, when you've recovered, you don't get rid of all of that kind of past. So that was great, and like this showed us like the trauma aspect really, really good. Like when Pike has his PTSD moments, and when Lunian Singh had her PTSD moments are really great. Mavenga, his whole thing is that his daughter is sick with an incurable cancer, and he's keeping her suspended in a transporter because he's hopeful that one of the strange new worlds will cover have a cure. And it kind of gets brought up a few times, but then ultimately what happens is a space nebula is like a sapient space nebula is like, yeah, you can just like suspend, like cure her, but she'll stay here forever. And I guess as a father, I would not be very happy with that, because like what's the difference between? But I guess my from where I have from attachment, he's willing to let her go so she can live forever, which I don't think. I don't know. Immortality again, and people who like exist on the perspective of immortality isn't all that it's cracked up to be. But whatever, I guess. That's kind of how it ends. Uhura, her deal is basically she came to Starfleet because her parents died and she had nothing else to kind of take comfort in. So even though she's like naturally gifted, she's not aspirational, and that kind of makes people feel comfortable, because a lot of people work very hard to get Starfleet, and she's kind of like, she coasts in there and it's like, I don't know if I'm even about all this life. So naturally all people are like, well, it's a bit intensive for you to say, you know what I mean? I'm just making myself bigger because I'm not really making it stuff there. Resolution will be good. I can move closer. Ignore me. Sorry, I should be playing around my BSO while I'm streaming. And she kind of has the biggest arc because she kind of changes her perspective slightly, and that she's more willing to give. She actually has like a beginning, middle, end of her arc, where her whole thing is that she's the one from attachments because she's scared of losing people, and then she actually grows to realize that because of her connection with Hema, who is just a bit much older, she has that kind of journey of learning that actually maybe she should learn to let people in. Ortegas doesn't really have any kind of deal about her, other than being the sassy Helms officer. Spock is basically doing very much the Spock's Spock is very much doing Spock things, where he's trying to resolve the conflict between his humanity and his Vulcan side. And it's interesting because this is before the second pilot of Star Trek, and in that pilot episode we see a Spock who's less committed to his Vulcan roots and lets a bit more of his emotions through. This happens again in the Cage, so between the Cage and the second pilot, when no one has gone before of Star Trek, he's a bit more emotional, and then he kind of becomes a bit more stoic. I'm wondering if that's kind of where Ethan Peck is playing the character here, or it's hard to tell, but he has that kind of whole thing about, am I human, am I not human? And there's also his whole connection with Krang, and trying to balance his Starfleet life with his relationship with her and his betrothal to her. And we know that ends up not going well because eventually they do part ways in the original series, so it's kind of going to be interesting to see what the backstory is behind that. And then we have Hemmer behind my shoulder here. If I can, you can't really see him because he's right behind in the far place. He's basically just paired with Uhura's arc, and he's also the only cast member to die in this season, so he gets killed in the episode, which I actually think he was underused. He's not in the show that much compared to the rest of the cast. I don't think I've not done any kind of proper data analysis. Like, he seems to have the least presence, which to me is annoying because he's one of the most interesting characters. He's a complete pacifist, and even though Starfleet isn't a military organization, it serves as the military arm for the Federation, and everyone's expected to kind of act as soldiers if need be. So it's a shame we didn't kind of cover that pacifism a bit more. Like, someone who's joined Starfleet and has rank in Starfleet, absolutely like refusing to kind of be violent in any way. He's blind, played by a blind actor, which again I feel like we've never seen more of in the show, because that would be great for the representation. He has a very kind of like caustic attitude, and again that's something that I would have enjoyed seeing more of, so especially me wasn't in this as much. So yeah, the first episode kind of sets up a lot of these arcs, the characters who exist. Some of the characters don't actually appear in the first episode, because they have to leave before anyone has a chance to. And yeah, the first mission is basically a first contact has gone. Well, basically, it's a direct sequel to kind of what happened at the end of Discovery, which is a nice kind of connection to where this spin-off came from. Shin Riley's gone to investigate a planet that suddenly has warp capabilities, and it's established using the warp power for weapons rather than travel. And it's because they were able to collect enough data from the season 2 finale Discovery that they were able to reverse engineer it, and essentially, like, Shin Riley's trying to basically clean up house and investigate the issues, but she and her away team get captured, and obviously they pollute the kind of the whole situation. There is it's basically a Prime Directive dispute situation. We get the whole kind of classic Star Trek things of disguising yourself as the aliens that you're infiltrating, trying to like disguise the fact that you're from a futuristic race, rescuing people, some kind of antics there, a little bit more about the characters, and then ultimately Pike is like establishes this is the show which is set in the early Federation years where people broke rules a whole bunch of times, was like, sod for Prime Directive, I'm gonna show everyone my big massive starship so that they learn to work together. It's a very kind of Watchmen resolution where they'll like give them something bigger to think about so they're not fighting each other. But it's a more kind of peaceful version of what happens in Watchmen, and that works. And they get away with it because Starfleet can't properly rebuke them for their actions without also officially admitting that Discovery existed. So they kind of get away with it. And we have the crew set up. Everyone else who hasn't arrived yet then arrives. Then we have the next episode, which is oh yes, so this is the episode where there's a comet's about to like hit and destroy a planet, and Discovery wants to kind of intervene. Let's establish that an alien species has like its pure like purpose is to like protect the comet and let it do whatever it's designed to do, and this is like divine kind of level of action. Oh yeah, we get a whole kind of recurring thing about like cooking for his crew. That's his like his like kind of Captain Quirk, which is really cute. Oh yes, this show is kind of a moment to let Uhura have her kind of show that moment, which she does. She learns it's very Discovery with the plot, where they learn that to communicate with the comet they use music. It's quite odd because then the episode ends with them not using that, using some completely other solution to like fix the problem. Like it's building up for like Uhura to basically use a song to kind of tell the comet to change its path. But actually something else kind of happens, and then there's the whole ties back to like Pike's whole backstory, in that there's a pre-programmed message in the comet that where it knew it was gonna like lose part of its mass, that was gonna cause it to like avoid the planet. But the only reason it was ever gonna lose that mass was because Enterprise intervened. And it's like, oh well, does the comet know the future? Does the comet know predestiny? And obviously this harks back to Pike's being out predestiny. Also, Sam Kike. Jeez, why am I confusing the name Kirk and Pike? Sam Kirk is in this series as a recurring character, playing Lieutenant Kirk, who is canonically in the original series as well, George Kirk's brother, James Kirk's brother, although Sam, I think we only see Sam after he dies, and then Kirk never brings him up again, even when he, which is my favourite thing, because like there's a line in Star Trek V, Final Frontier, where Kirk's like, I lost a brother once, and he's referring to when you lost Spock, and I was like, you lost a natural brother before that, you have a natural biological brother who is dead. Yeah. And then we also get to like kind of Pike continuing to kind of like be diplomatic, and we see a bit of Discovery do a bit of like space battle stuff, and the space battle stuff in this show is like excellent. Like it's not completely like a whole like lens flare, jittery lights, blurred metallic things in space. It's more intimate, and it's what you imagine the original series to look like if the series was made today, with like ships properly like flying around each other and having like this obvious like knowledge of where they are to each other in space. So that was fun. Ghost of Illyria, which would make it sound like it's a horror episode, but actually the horror episode is yet to come. They go to Illyria. This is where we learn the first officer is Illyrian. There's a kind of mystery about what happened to the planet and what happened to the people, and established, and there's but essentially it's the episode where it's the infection, Star Trek episode where the cast get infected by something mysterious and they have to look at the mystery and reverse it, and it's established, and basically what they learn is that the Illyrians genetically engineered a way to keep themselves immune to a certain virus, but that also made them like very hyper, I guess, phonic, where they like are obsessed with getting never light, to the point where they would go into dangerous places, where they would go into dangerous situations where there is a lot of bright lights that would harm them, and then that's what happened to them. But the light pattern, it's a bit, and I'll describe it, and I'm not here to kind of tell you the plot. But yeah, it's probably not the strongest episode of the series because not really much happens. But it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a medical mystery kind of thing, but like only as far as Star Trek medical mysteries, where it's more about the kind of mystery start than it is about the medical side, and it kind of loses a bit here and there. Yeah, it's basically where progressively more and more of the crew become incapacitated, and so it's up to the one final person to kind of save everyone, and they do miraculously towards the end, and everyone kind of gets survived. It's when we learn about Remember's daughter. Day of Memento Mori, and this so this is the first Gorn episode, and the show like takes a very, it's very similar to actually one of the early episodes of Firefly, when they first introduced the Reavers, and we don't see the Reavers in the episode, but we see kind of the survivors of a Reaver attack, the leftovers from a Reaver attack, and we fight like not in that episode, but like in a previous episode, they fight. They get encounter a Reaver ship and have to escape a Reaver ship. And we don't ever see the Reavers in Firefly until the film. And it's very similar to kind of here. We first, we don't see the Gorn in this episode, but we see a Gorn ship. They fight a Gorn ship. We see survivors. We see like a lot of blood. So the show is like less gory than Discovery and Picard are, which I think are too gory because I think gore should be in Star Trek purely because Star Trek should be like more accessible to more people, and I think for gore you kind of limit that. I think you can be more adult in Star Trek without having to be more gory, and a lot of the gore I think is excessive and egregious. This show tones itself back a bit more, so it's not as like gory as the other two, but it gets close. So this show, we don't ever really see kind of injury detail. We see blood and spears on the floor. We see people lying in pools of blood. We don't really see much kind of actual injury happening in process, so it's fine. La'an is kind of having to deal with advising the captain how to face the Gorn. There's not much conflict though. He kind of pretty much trusts her. And yeah, it's very much like kind of. It's more actually like Balance of Terror than the finale is, in that you have two ships you can't properly. Why can't I say properly in this stream? Can't properly see each other, trying to move around each other, and eventually Pike's the thing about flying. There's a thing where he flies the ship close up to the sun that they go and think he's been destroyed, and he escapes at that moment. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. And part of it, like a ship get kind of separated. This is the first time Hemmer and Uhura have their moment together, and Hemmer's like hands get crushed, so Uhura has to like do a lot of the kind of things behind her on his behalf. Pike has to make like decisions about sacrificing members of his crew. He has to like seal off parts of the ship that have bulkhead breaches to save the rest of the ship. And that's like, and the cast like, throughout this whole thing, everything that's an emotional thing, the cast really sell it really well. Spock and Mock is the comedy episode of the series. It's the more kind of it's basically Spock and T'Pring accidentally body swap. It's basically Freaky Friday but Star Trek, and they're in opposite bodies. They have to do each other's job. They don't really do each other's job very well, but they kind of learn each other much more closely. Learn each other's like lives more closely. I think the funny thing about this is the race who they're trying to negotiate with, who are called the Rongovian Protectorate, and they're like social mirrors. They will, I think it's similar to like another species that occurs in Next Generation. They will imitate how people are. The whole deal is they're very empathetic. So they will respond to people the same way that they're spoken to, because they are showing like extreme empathy, and they're basically being a mirror. So when the Tellarites speak to them, they're being very kind of. They're being very rude. When the Vulcan was speaking to him, they're being very logical. So Pike decided the best way to kind of get on their side was to be empathetic back to them and like mirror what he believes would be their anxieties, and basically like, you shouldn't join the Federation, you got nothing to gain from this, and like being brutally honest. They were supposed to be bad diplomatically, but it gains a kind of trust, and I think that was a very interesting moment. I enjoyed that. Lifters where suffering cannot reach is another interesting Star Trek episode. For some reason, Paranormal Plus put me on edge because it had a warning this episode was going to have strong horror in it, and I was expecting it to be like jump scareful. There was not a single jump scare. There was not a single horror. There was a horrifying element to the show in its reveal at the end, and it's horrifying in its premise, but not in its execution. So basically, the plot twist at the end is that the kid who the Enterprise had been protecting, the next leader of the next like kind of spiritual leader of the planet, is basically being used as a battery to help, you know, power civilization to his own personal demise and suffering. And we see the body of the previous child, all like burnt out, but it just looks like it's just a corpse, and it's not like a particularly graphic corpse. It's not like jump scare reveal to us. It's kind of very like emasculated corpse. Emasculate, that's not the right word. It's like, you know, it's a decayed corpse, but not like graphically or gorily. Like it's not. I wouldn't consider it to be horror, but maybe it's what the censors of the show did. Yeah, it's an interesting episode. Pike at a very kind of vulnerable thing. He has a like personal relationship with the person he's dealing with, so he kind of underestimates her, and but like in a sense, and basically the reveal is that the people who are fighting were actually trying to like save the kid's life, and he's like obviously like he's having to deal with like the fact that he kind of helped this kid to his death, and it's very kind of it's a bit complicated in that sense, but it's not complicated actually. I think morally everyone is like, this planet is wrong, but there's nothing they can do about it. It's happened and they've got no jurisdiction over the planet, so it's that kind of resolution. But it's a very classical Star Trek episode in that fact. The Serene Squall is a fun episode because the villain is like the person who plays the villain does it in a very over-the-top camp theatrical way, and I always love villains who go over the top in theatrical ways. And once she became the villain, she was great in the episode. I didn't like her until that point, but after that fact, she was great. And it's a bit more like of a light-hearted episode. Like this Enterprise gets taken over and invaded because it gets tricked, but everyone's just like uses their wits and their charm to get out of it. Pike basically engineers a mutiny. There's a kind of a cringy part where like Spock has to pretend he's doing a fair and T'Pring, so T'Pring can like not give them a prisoner that this pirate wants, and it doesn't make entirely a bunch of sense why his gambit works versus a whole bunch of other things, but it's kind of what they're going for. And there's a kind of a there's kind of a like it's basically there's a whole thing about how Nurse Chappelle and Spock do they have feelings for each other, and this is a reference to the original series because Chappelle clearly had like a crush on Spock. This is kind of seen multiple times, much like how, you know, in the Kelvin universe, Uhura and Spock are like have romantic feelings for each other, and this is basically based purely on the fact that in the original series there is like one scene where they flirt. There's like one or two scenes in the original series where Chappelle and Spock flirt, and apparently now we have to have a love triangle situation. I mean, it's never really explicit that Spock reciprocates those feelings in the original series, but for some reason that has to be like an element here. I don't really know why. The most interesting thing is, and the thing I liked most about this episode is the re-acknowledgement of Cyborg for the first time since the film to Final Frontier. It's interesting because obviously we had Burnham introduced as a secret sibling, and you know people criticise the secret sibling nature of Burnham, and then you know other people pointing out, well, actually Spock historically always keeps his siblings secret for one reason or the other, and so it's interesting that they basically acknowledge that Cyborg is around, because I felt like he's an interesting concept that was massively not used very well, as a lot of elements were in the Final Frontier. So yeah, I like that they're acknowledging that Cyborg's, you know, an aspect of the canon. And I do wonder I do wonder if Starbucks is going to come back. I hope that he does. Whoever they've cast as a body double in this episode looks a lot like Cyborg, who we expect Cyborg to look at this age. It seems to imply that you know, what's her name? What is her name? Angel is gonna come back as a kind of recurring villain. I think that she has that kind of presence to her. Legion Kingdom is another kind of comedy-esque episode. It's also a very much an original series kind of premise where an alien consciousness takes you know, pity on November's daughter, plucks out of her brain the kind of story that she's very fond of, and everyone in the ship has to kind of play those roles. And it's like a hologram. It's basically a holodeck episode without being a holodeck episode. And it just follows all of those beats. Well, it's trying to work out exactly why things are how they are, and it has to like navigate a mixture of being on the ship. It is actually quite interesting because, like, rather than just being completely in like a mystical kingdom, it's a hybrid between the kingdom and the ship. So Movember and Hema are still both able to use technology that everyone else, you know, can't perceive. And it's kind of this interesting mix. So it was a bit cringy at times, and also it was a bit amusing. You watch some actors and you're like, I can't tell if they're enjoying playing this role or if they're just forcing themselves through it. All Those Who Wander is the second Gone episode, and a much more kind of graphic one. We have, you know, we have like baby Gone bursting out of people's bodies, slitting throats, chopping into necks, and blood spurting, and it's not much jump scares, but there's a whole bunch of, like, you know, graphicness in it. So yeah, it's perhaps the most Discovery-esque episode in its darkness and that element. And it's basically a horror episode. It's basically, you know, a monster in the house style one. It's not much else to go to it. They discover a crashed ship. The crew are all like dead and dismembered and like bloody bodies everywhere. They find a child. They find another survivor who turns out to be the host. It's basically aliens in a sense. They have to kind of hunt down Lagon. There's some like internal bickering. Spock has to deal with his humanity again as he kind of deals with the death of an officer who just got promoted. And then Hema sacrifices his life because he gets infected and refuses to give people a chance to save him because it's too risky. So he basically jumps to his death. And again, I think he's underused. I think he kind of, I don't mind him dying in the first season if he appeared more throughout the first season, but he didn't really do much more. And then Quality Mercy is the episode I've just watched, so I'm going to try and give my thoughts on it as my throat dries up. I've not drunk enough water today and my glass is empty. More please? No, just me in the house. So this is basically, so Pike's considering trying to change the future by warning the two or three cadets who he knows will die despite his efforts to save them, telling them this is what's happening in the future, do something so it doesn't happen. And then a future Pike appears and it's like, if this happens, you'll basically make the future worse, which I don't actually, is the Temporal Prime Directive a thing in this timeline? Is this part of Star Trek? I don't know. And basically fast forward 7 years in the future, in 2266, and we basically relive the episode Balance of Terror through Pike's eyes. Sorry, rather with Pike being the captain, and so you know, and well, but not entirely the same. There's like a whole bunch of differences because we still have, like, for the most part, the current. So in the original Balance of Terror, it's obviously the original series cast members, whereas here we still have Movember on the ship as the chief medical officer. So for whatever reason, because Pike's still a captain, Movember doesn't leave. But I guess it makes sense because Movember is one of Pike's friends. Ortega's is still the Helms officer rather than Sulu. Obviously, Chappelle, Spock, and her are on the ship anyway. And then a whole bunch of other crew people are like different, but that makes sense. So it's not from the get-go, it's different. But Ortega's kind of what I love about the episode is they copy paste a whole bunch of the lines from the original series episode into this series, and it's like a mix of this great commitment to canon, but also it's a bit funny because like the way they spoke in the original series was very like theatrical, because a lot of TV in the 60s was like theatrical. It was almost like a stage play, but for TV, but you know, it was in filmed and broadcast. You know, it's not like we haven't quite separated. Stage from theatre, from film, from TV at that point. So it's they shot a lot of like a lot of like TV was filmed in like a single take as if it was a play. So you'd rehearse it like a play and act out like a play, and that was like one take that was done. And so a lot of like the dialogue was very theatrical, and so I like how that theatrical element kind of bleeds through. It's very, very funny in that sense. And I think there's actually one shot of Ortega's where they actually do the whole thing where the light is like barn doored on just her eyes, not the rest of her face. So like the shadows on the top and the bottom of the face and highlights the middle of the face in a way that they always keep doing in the original series, and that was really funny. But like it was good in like a homage kind of sense. It was like, it wasn't bad. It was like I enjoyed it and they did that. And yeah, it's interesting compared to episodes, because really there's like similar things that happen, like the quotes. And some of the reactions. Also, when we first realised that Romulans look like Vulcans in the original series, there's like a camera track towards Spock, who then does his distinct eyebrow raise, and you replicate this episode, but I think even Peck overplays it too much, and he just looks a bit. It kind of just like goes from normal to like raised eyebrow, like very, very like purposefully, to the point where it doesn't seem as natural, and where that's Leonard Nimoy does it. And I know even Peck can do like a natural eyebrow raise because he does it a whole bunch of times in the series. I think because this was a deliberate like replication, he did it a bit too much, and it's a bit cringy, but we'll let it go. Another kind of fun Easter egg is we hear Scotty, but just as the voice. But we also get Kirk in this episode, like James Kirk, played by a new actor who I don't think quite captures William Shatner. Like Chris Pine captures William Shatner, but still makes him look it still acts a bit differently. This character in this show, from a distance, if you squint, yeah, it looks a bit like William Shatner, and like I don't need to be like exactly the same, but like so far they've done pretty good kind of replications. I don't think they quite hit it with James Cook, which is a bit confusing because you think he'd be the one that want to get the most like down. But it doesn't matter. And yeah, I mean, basically, this episode was a foregone conclusion. I think the second older Pike was like, if you change the future, worse things will happen. So like the resolution episode was kind of gone. It wasn't like kind of intenseness there. It was more the build up towards it and seeing the changes. And so in the original show, it's weird because like this episode, Pike is acting as if Kirk is acting too brash, and that's maybe a bad thing. But in the original episode, both in this episode and the original episode, Kirk advocates for like harsh action in this episode. In the original episode, he acts a bit more like Pike, but also like not. I don't. All of the ways that this episode, if you hadn't watched Balance of Terror, you just watched this episode, all the ways that you'd think that it went down differently in the other timeline because of Kirk's actions, you would assume he went like full on aggro. But in the original one, he was like much more tactical and balanced. I mean, he was fully like prepared to like go after the shit, but he wasn't like targeted violence about it. You know what I mean? He was like, and he didn't want to go there and destroy the shit. But I guess he changed enough about both timelines, and nothing's gonna change. So it's an interesting episode in that sense. And maybe I need to reflect on it a bit more. But I did enjoy the whole homages to like the episode, the whole like replication, and also that kind of it being its own plot. And you know, not being afraid to be like, you can't change. There's no third way out here situation. You're it's this and nothing else kind of situation. Yeah, mine running out of like the ability to speak now, so I'm gonna end before I faint. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. I've just realised it's my last day off. I'll go back to work tomorrow, so sad times for me. I need to finish watching Prodigy, so I'm like I think 7 episodes through, but I think they're still broadcasting Prodigy. I think it's a longer show, so I think I'm gonna catch up to it at some point and then watch it as it broadcasts. So I don't know how I'm gonna react to that, but we'll see how that goes. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you soon. Bye.